What if I told you that every single day your emotions are hijacking your potential? Right now, as you listen to this, your brain is operating on autopilot, letting feelings drive decisions that could make or break your future. You get angry and send that message you'll regret. You feel nervous and avoid the conversation that could change your career. You get excited and make the investment that destroys your savings. You're not alone. 99% of people live as emotional slaves, reacting instead of responding. And it's costing them everything. But what if there was a different way? What if you could flip a switch in your brain and operate like the most successful people in the world? CEOs who stay calm under pressure, negotiators who turn conflict into profit, military strategists who make life or death decisions without breaking a sweat. These people aren't emotionless robots. They've simply learned to install what I call the logic engine, a mental system that converts emotional triggers into strategic advantages. Today, you're going to learn how to build your own logic engine. By the end of this audiobook, emotional reactions will become a thing of the past. You'll have the power to pause, process, and respond with surgical precision in any situation. You'll never again lose a negotiation because you got frustrated, damage a relationship because you got defensive, or miss an opportunity because you got scared. This isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about weaponizing logic to create the life you actually want. Chapter 1: The Emotional Hijack Epidemic. Right now, there's a war happening inside your brain, and you're losing. On one side, you have your logical, rational mind that wants to make smart decisions and create a better future. On the other side, you have your emotional brain, a primitive system that's been hijacking your behavior for your entire life. And here's the brutal truth: emotions are winning, and it's destroying your potential. Every day, millions of people make decisions that sabotage their own success, and they don't even realize it's happening. They quit their job in a moment of anger and regret it for years. They invest their life savings because they got caught up in the excitement of a pitch. They destroy relationships because they couldn't control their pride. They avoid opportunities because fear convinced them they weren't ready. This is the emotional hijack epidemic, and it's the reason why most people never reach their full potential. Your brain wasn't designed for the modern world. The emotional centers that kept your ancestors alive in the wilderness are now sabotaging your success in the boardroom. When your boss criticizes your work, your brain doesn't see constructive feedback. It sees a threat to your survival and floods your system with stress hormones. When someone challenges your opinion, your brain doesn't register intellectual debate. It interprets it as a personal attack and triggers your fight or flight response. When you see an investment opportunity, your brain doesn't calculate risk and reward. It gets swept up in greed or paralyzed by fear. This is why smart people make stupid decisions. This is why talented individuals stay stuck in mediocrity. This is why people with all the knowledge in the world still can't execute on their dreams. Knowledge isn't enough. Intelligence isn't enough. You need a system that can override your emotional programming and access the strategic thinking that creates real success. The cost of emotional decision-making is staggering. Consider the career opportunities you've missed because you were too proud to admit you were wrong. Think about the business deals that fell through because you couldn't control your frustration. Remember the relationships you've damaged because you reacted instead of responding. Calculate the money you've lost on investments made in moments of excitement or panic. This isn't just about missed opportunities. This is about a fundamental failure to optimize your life. Most people live in what I call emotional quicksand. The harder they struggle against their reactions, the deeper they sink. They try to suppress their feelings, but suppression only creates more pressure. They try to think positive thoughts, but toxic positivity doesn't address the underlying problem. They try to manage their emotions. But management isn't enough when you're dealing with a system that operates faster than conscious thought. The elite operate differently. They understand that emotions aren't the enemy. They're simply information, but they've learned to process that information through a logical filter before making any decision. They've trained themselves to create space between stimulus and response, to insert strategic thinking into moments of high emotion. They've built what neuroscientists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift between different mental frameworks depending on the situation. This isn't about becoming emotionally numb. Emotions provide valuable data about your environment, your relationships, and your goals. Fear can signal real danger. Anger can highlight injustice. Excitement can point toward opportunity. But successful people have learned to receive this emotional data without being controlled by it. They use emotions as input for logical analysis, not as commands for immediate action. The difference between reactive and strategic thinking isn't talent or intelligence. It's training. Just like you can train your body to become stronger and faster, you can train your brain to become more logical and strategic. You can build mental habits that automatically engage your rational mind before your emotional mind takes control. You can develop the ability to stay calm under pressure, think clearly in chaos, and make decisions that align with your long-term goals instead of your short-term feelings. But here's what most people don't understand. You can't fight emotion with emotion. You can't overcome impulsive behavior by trying harder or wanting it more. You need a systematic approach that rewires the way your brain processes challenging situations. You need the logic engine. Chapter 2. The logic engine system revealed. The logic engine isn't just a concept. It's a precise mental technology that the most successful people use to convert emotional chaos into strategic clarity. This system operates on a simple but powerful principle. Every emotional trigger can be transformed into a strategic advantage if you know how to process it correctly. Instead of being hijacked by your feelings, you learn to use them as fuel for better decision-making. At its core, the logic engine is a 5-stage mental process that automatically engages whenever you encounter a potentially emotional situation. Think of it as installing new software in your brain. Software that runs a diagnostic scan before your emotional operating system can take control. This isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending they don't exist. It's about creating a buffer zone where logic can evaluate the situation and choose the optimal response. Stage 1 is recognition. The ability to identify emotional triggers before they overwhelm your rational thinking. Most people are completely unconscious of their emotional patterns. They get angry, sad, excited, or afraid without even realizing what set them off. But once you develop recognition skills, you create the first and most crucial element of emotional freedom: awareness. You can't change what you can't see. Stage 2 is pause, the discipline to create space between trigger and response. This is where most people fail. They feel the emotion and immediately react. They hear criticism and get defensive. They see an opportunity and jump without thinking. They experience conflict and either attack or retreat. The pause stage teaches you to insert a conscious decision point into what was previously an unconscious process. Stage 3 is analysis. The systematic evaluation of what's really happening beneath the surface of the emotional trigger. Most emotions are based on incomplete information, past experiences, or irrational fears. The analysis stage teaches you to separate facts from feelings, to identify what's actually at stake, and to recognize the real opportunity hidden within every challenging situation. Stage 4 is strategy. The process of determining the optimal response based on logical evaluation rather than emotional impulse. This is where you shift from reactive to proactive thinking. Instead of asking, "How do I feel about this?" you ask, "What's the smartest move here?" Instead of being driven by immediate emotional needs, you're guided by long-term strategic goals. Stage 5 is execution. The ability to implement your strategic decision even when your emotions are pushing you in a different direction. This is where discipline meets strategy. You've identified the trigger, paused to think, analyzed the situation, and chosen the optimal response. Now you must have the courage to act on logic instead of emotion, even when every fiber of your being wants to do something else. But here's what makes the logic engine truly powerful. It doesn't just help you manage emotions in the moment. Over time, it actually rewires your brain to default to strategic thinking. Neuroscience shows us that repeated mental patterns create stronger neural pathways. Every time you successfully use the logic engine, you're making it easier to access the next time. Eventually, strategic thinking becomes your automatic response to challenging situations. The logic engine works because it addresses the root cause of poor decision-making. The gap between emotional impulse and rational evaluation. Most self-help approaches try to fix the symptoms. They tell you to think positive thoughts or use willpower to resist temptation. But the logic engine targets the underlying system that generates those problematic emotions in the first place. This system is based on extensive research from cognitive behavioral therapy, military decision-making protocols, and the strategies used by elite performers in high-pressure environments. Fighter pilots use a version of this system to make life-or-death decisions in seconds. Emergency room doctors use it to stay calm while saving lives. Top negotiators use it to turn hostile situations into profitable agreements. CEOs use it to make billion-dollar decisions without being swayed by market emotions. The beauty of the logic engine is that it scales to any situation. Whether you're dealing with a difficult conversation with your spouse, a challenging negotiation at work, or a major life decision, the same five-stage process applies. You recognize the emotional trigger, pause to create space, analyze what's really happening, determine the strategic response, and execute with discipline. Most people spend their entire lives being pushed around by their emotions. They make decisions based on how they feel in the moment, not on what will create the best outcomes in the future. They're reactive instead of proactive, emotional instead of strategic. But once you install the logic engine, you join the ranks of people who control their own destiny. You become someone who responds instead of reacts, who thinks instead of feels, who creates instead of just survives. The transformation doesn't happen overnight, but it happens faster than you might expect. Within weeks of implementing this system, you'll notice that situations that used to trigger massive emotional responses now feel manageable. Problems that used to overwhelm you will become puzzles to solve. Conflicts that used to drain your energy will become opportunities to practice your strategic thinking skills. Chapter 3: Recognition. Identifying your emotional triggers before they strike. Recognition is the foundation of the logic engine, and it's where most people fail before they even begin. You cannot manage what you cannot see, and the vast majority of people are completely blind to their own emotional patterns. They live in a constant state of reaction, bouncing from one emotional state to another without ever understanding what's driving their behavior. But once you develop true recognition skills, you gain something most people never have: the power to see your emotions coming before they take control. The problem with emotions is that they operate faster than conscious thought. By the time you realize you're angry, defensive, or afraid, your brain has already released a cocktail of chemicals that influence your thinking and behavior. Your heart rate increases, your breathing changes, your muscles tense, and your rational mind gets pushed into the background. At this point, you're already hijacked. The goal of recognition training is to identify the warning signs before the hijack happens. Every person has a unique emotional fingerprint, a set of specific triggers that consistently generate the same problematic responses. For some people, it's criticism that triggers defensiveness. For others, it's uncertainty that triggers anxiety. Some get angry when they feel disrespected. Others get overwhelmed when they feel pressured. Some are triggered by success, others by failure. The specific triggers don't matter as much as your ability to identify your personal patterns. The first step in developing recognition skills is to conduct what I call an emotional audit. For the next week, pay attention to every moment when you feel a strong emotional response. Don't try to change anything, just observe. When do you get angry? What situations make you defensive? When do you feel anxious or overwhelmed? What triggers your excitement or fear? Keep a simple log. Trigger, emotion, response, outcome. Most people are shocked by what they discover during their emotional audit. They realize they have the same arguments with their spouse about the same issues every month. They notice they get defensive whenever someone questions their expertise. They see that they avoid certain conversations because they're afraid of conflict. They recognize that they make impulsive purchases when they're stressed. The patterns become obvious once you start paying attention. But recognition goes deeper than just identifying your triggers. You need to understand the physical and mental warning signs that precede emotional hijacking. Your body always gives you signals before your emotions take control. Some people feel tension in their shoulders when they're getting stressed. Others notice their breathing becomes shallow when they're anxious. Some clench their jaw when they're frustrated. Others tap their feet when they're impatient. These physical signals are your early warning system. They're your brain's way of preparing your body for action before your conscious mind has even processed what's happening. By learning to recognize these subtle physical changes, you can identify emotional triggers before they reach the threshold where they overwhelm your rational thinking. Mental warning signs are equally important. Notice when your thinking becomes black and white. When you start catastrophizing about worst-case scenarios, when you become fixated on being right instead of finding solutions. Pay attention to when your internal dialogue becomes harsh or critical. When you start making assumptions about other people's motives, when you feel the urge to prove a point or defend your position. The most powerful recognition tool is what I call the trigger map. This is a comprehensive inventory of your emotional patterns that becomes more accurate and useful over time. Start by identifying your top 5 emotional triggers. For each trigger, note the typical situations where it occurs, the physical warning signs you experience, the mental patterns that emerge, and the actions you typically take when hijacked. For example, your trigger might be feeling micromanaged at work. The typical situations could be when your boss asks for frequent updates or questions your methods. The physical warning signs might be tension in your neck and a feeling of heat in your face. The mental patterns could be thoughts like, "They don't trust me," or "I'm being treated like a child." The typical actions might be getting short with colleagues or working late to prove you're dedication. Once you have this map, you can start to see your emotional patterns with crystal clarity. You'll begin to recognize the early stages of emotional triggers before they escalate into full hijacking. You'll notice the subtle shift in your body language before you get defensive. You'll catch the moment when your thinking starts to become rigid before you say something you'll regret. But recognition isn't just about identifying negative emotional triggers. You also need to recognize when you're making decisions based on positive emotions that might not serve your long-term interests. Excitement about a new opportunity might cause you to skip due diligence. Optimism about a relationship might make you ignore red flags. Confidence after a success might lead you to take unnecessary risks. The goal is to develop what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to think about your thinking. You want to become an observer of your own mental and emotional processes. This doesn't mean becoming detached or analytical about everything in your life. It means developing the skill to step outside your immediate experience and evaluate what's really happening. Advanced recognition involves understanding the deeper patterns beneath your triggers. Often, what appears to be triggered by external events is actually triggered by internal fears or unmet needs. Anger about being interrupted might really be about feeling unheard or unimportant. Anxiety about public speaking might be about fear of judgment or rejection. Frustration with inefficiency might be about need for control or predictability. The more accurately you can identify the root cause of your emotional triggers, the more effectively you can address them with strategic responses. Recognition is not about eliminating emotions or becoming immune to triggers. It's about developing the awareness and skills to see what's happening before you're swept away by it. It's about creating space between trigger and response where logic can operate. Chapter 4. Pause. Creating space between stimulus and response. The pause is where transformation happens. It's the critical moment between recognizing an emotional trigger and choosing your response. Most people skip this stage entirely, moving directly from trigger to reaction in a matter of milliseconds. But this tiny gap is where all your power lies. It's the difference between being controlled by your emotions and using them as information for better decision-making. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote about this space. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. This isn't just philosophical wisdom. It's practical neuroscience. Every time you successfully pause, you're strengthening the neural pathways that support rational decision-making and weakening the pathways that support impulsive reactions. The challenge with pausing is that it goes against every instinct your brain has developed over millions of years of evolution. Your emotional brain is designed for immediate action. When it detects a threat, whether real or imagined, it wants to fight, flee, or freeze right now. It doesn't want to pause and think. It wants to react to keep you safe. But in the modern world, most of our triggers aren't life-threatening, and immediate reaction usually makes things worse, not better. The first technique for creating effective pauses is what I call the circuit breaker method. Just like an electrical circuit breaker prevents dangerous power surges by temporarily cutting the connection, you can install mental circuit breakers that automatically engage when you recognize emotional triggers. The simplest version is the classic advice to count to 10 before responding. But effective pausing requires more sophisticated techniques. Physical pausing involves using your body to interrupt the emotional momentum. When you feel triggered, take 3 deep breaths, focusing on making your exhale longer than your inhale. This activates your parasympathetic nervous system and creates a physiological shift from reaction mode to thinking mode. Some people find it helpful to excuse themselves to the bathroom or step outside for a moment. Others use subtle physical techniques like pressing their feet firmly into the ground or placing their hand on their heart. Mental pausing involves inserting conscious thought into what was previously an unconscious process. Instead of immediately forming opinions about what's happening, ask yourself questions. What am I feeling right now? What triggered this feeling? What assumptions am I making? What don't I know about this situation? These questions force your rational mind to engage before your emotional mind can take complete control. Verbal pausing involves buying time in conversations so you can think before you speak. Master negotiators use phrases like, "That's an interesting point. Let me think about that for a moment." Or, "Help me understand your perspective on this." Or, "Before I respond, can you clarify what you mean by?" These phrases serve a dual purpose. They give you time to engage your logic engine while demonstrating respect for the other person's input. But the most powerful pausing technique is what I call perspective shifting. Instead of experiencing the situation from inside your emotional reaction, mentally step outside the situation and observe it as if you were watching someone else. Ask yourself, if I were advising someone else in this exact situation, what would I tell them to do? This simple shift in perspective often provides instant clarity about the best course of action. The duration of your pause depends on the intensity of the trigger and the importance of the situation. For minor irritations, a 3-second pause might be sufficient. For major decisions or highly charged situations, you might need minutes, hours, or even days. There's no shame in saying, "I need some time to think about this," when facing important decisions. In fact, the ability to delay gratification and resist the pressure for immediate responses is one of the most reliable predictors of success in life. Advanced pausing involves what neuroscientists call cognitive reappraisal. The ability to consciously change your interpretation of events. Instead of automatically labeling situations as threatening, unfair, or overwhelming, you can pause and consider alternative interpretations. Maybe that critical feedback is actually an opportunity to improve. Maybe that unexpected challenge is a chance to demonstrate your capabilities. Maybe that rejection is a redirection towards something better. The goal isn't to become slow or indecisive. The goal is to become thoughtful and strategic. Some situations do require quick decisions, but most of the important decisions in life benefit from at least a moment of strategic thinking. The executives who build successful companies are not the ones who react fastest to market changes. They're the ones who pause long enough to understand what's really happening and then respond with carefully considered strategies. One of the most common obstacles to effective pausing is social pressure. Other people expect immediate responses. They want you to answer their questions, make decisions, or react to their provocations right away. But you always have more time than you think. You can say, "Let me get back to you on that." You can say, "I want to give this the consideration it deserves." You can say, "I need a moment to process this information." Pausing also requires overcoming your own internal pressure for immediate action. Part of you will resist pausing because it feels passive or weak. Your emotional brain will generate thoughts like, "You need to respond right now or you'll lose credibility," or "If you don't act immediately, you'll miss this opportunity." These thoughts are almost always wrong. In most situations, thoughtful responses are more effective than immediate reactions. The more you practice pausing, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, you develop what I call strategic reflexes, automatic habits that engage your thinking brain before your emotional brain can take control. You start to pause without thinking about pausing. You automatically create space for logic to operate. You become someone who responds thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively. Chapter 5. Analysis. Separating facts from feelings to see what's really happening. Analysis is where your logic engine transforms from a simple emotional management tool into a sophisticated strategic thinking system. Once you've recognized your triggers and created space to think, you need to systematically evaluate what's actually happening beneath the surface of your emotional reactions. This is where most people make critical errors because they mistake their feelings for facts and their interpretations for reality. Your emotional brain is not designed to give you accurate information about complex situations. It's designed to keep you alive by making fast decisions based on incomplete information. When your ancestor heard rustling in the bushes, their emotional brain didn't pause to analyze whether it was a predator or just the wind. It triggered immediate action to get to safety. This system kept humans alive for millions of years but it's terrible at helping you navigate modern challenges like workplace politics, relationship conflicts. The first step in effective analysis is learning to distinguish between facts and interpretations. Facts are observable, measurable, verifiable pieces of information. Your boss said, "I need to see you in my office at 3 p.m." That's a fact. Your interpretation might be, "I'm in trouble," or "I'm getting fired," or "they want to promote me." But those interpretations aren't facts. They're stories your brain creates to make sense of limited information. Most emotional triggers are based on interpretations, not facts. Someone doesn't return your text message immediately, and you interpret this as rejection or disrespect. A colleague questions your idea in a meeting, and you interpret this as an attack on your competence. Your partner seems distant, and you interpret this as a sign that the relationship is failing. But these interpretations might be completely wrong. The fact versus story analysis is a systematic way to separate what you know from what you assume. When you feel triggered, write down exactly what happened using only factual, observable information. Then write down the story your brain is telling you about what those facts mean. Finally, consider alternative stories that could explain the same facts. For example, if your boss seems short with you during a meeting, the facts might be, "My boss spoke to me in brief sentences, maintained limited eye contact, and ended our conversation quickly." Your story might be, "My boss is unhappy with my performance and is considering firing me." Alternative stories could include, "My boss is stressed about a deadline." "My boss just received difficult news." "My boss is focused on preparing for another meeting." Or, "My boss is dealing with personal issues." The goal isn't to convince yourself that negative interpretations are always wrong. Sometimes your initial interpretation is accurate. The goal is to avoid making important decisions based on assumptions that might be incorrect. By identifying multiple possible explanations for the same set of facts, you can choose responses that work, regardless of which interpretation turns out to be true. Advanced analysis involves understanding the deeper psychological dynamics that drive both your reactions and other people's behavior. Most conflicts, for example, are not really about the surface issue that triggered them. They're about underlying needs, fears, or values that aren't being addressed. The argument about household chores might really be about feeling unappreciated. The disagreement about project direction might really be about autonomy or recognition. The iceberg analysis helps you identify what's happening beneath the surface of any challenging situation. The tip of the iceberg represents the visible behavior or event that triggered your emotion. But the bulk of the iceberg, the part that's hidden underwater, represents the deeper psychological factors that are really driving the situation. Understanding these hidden factors often reveals strategic opportunities that weren't apparent when you were focused only on the surface level. When analyzing other people's behavior, remember that everyone is operating according to their own internal logic. Their actions make perfect sense to them based on their fears, desires, past experiences, and current pressures. Instead of judging their behavior as right or wrong, try to understand the internal logic that would make their actions seem reasonable from their perspective. This understanding often reveals leverage points you can use to influence the situation in a positive direction. The timeline analysis is another powerful tool for gaining strategic clarity. Most emotional reactions are triggered by immediate events, but the real significance of those events can only be understood in a larger context. Ask yourself, what events led up to this situation? What patterns have been developing over time? How does this fit into the bigger picture of what's happening in this relationship, project, or area of your life? Often, what feels like a sudden crisis is actually the culmination of a longer pattern that you could have addressed earlier if you had been paying attention. The employee who suddenly quits in anger has probably been showing signs of dissatisfaction for months. The project that fails at the last minute has probably been struggling with unaddressed issues since the beginning. The relationship that explodes over a minor disagreement has probably been deteriorating due to unresolved communication problems. Risk-benefit analysis applies logical evaluation to emotional situations. When you feel triggered to take immediate action, pause and systematically evaluate the potential outcomes of different response strategies. What's the best case scenario for each possible response? What's the worst case scenario? What's the most likely outcome? What are the long-term implications of each choice? This type of analysis often reveals that the response your emotions are pushing for is actually the highest risk, lowest reward option. Getting angry and confrontational might feel satisfying in the moment, but it's likely to damage relationships and reduce your influence. Avoiding the situation entirely might feel safe, but it's likely to allow problems to grow and miss opportunities for positive change. The Strategic Questions Framework provides a systematic approach to analysis. Instead of trying to figure out how to react to what's happening, ask yourself, what outcome do I actually want from this situation? What would need to happen for all parties to feel good about the resolution? What resources and leverage do I have available? What don't I know that I need to find out? What would the person I want to become do in this situation? These questions shift your brain from reactive thinking to strategic thinking. Instead of being focused on the immediate trigger, you start thinking about desired outcomes and optimal strategies. This shift in focus often reveals opportunities and solutions that weren't visible when you were caught up in the emotional aspects of the situation. Effective analysis takes practice because it requires you to override some of your brain's most fundamental impulses. Your emotional brain wants you to trust your first impression. Defend your initial interpretation and take immediate action. But strategic thinking requires intellectual humility, the willingness to question your assumptions and consider alternative perspectives. The more you practice this systematic approach to analysis, the more accurately you'll understand what's really happening in complex situations, and the more effectively you'll be able to respond. Chapter 6: Strategy. Determining the optimal response based on logic, not emotion. Strategy is where your logic engine transforms from defensive tool into offensive weapon. You've recognized the trigger, paused to create space. and analyzed what's really happening. Now comes the moment that separates amateur emotional managers from strategic masters, determining the optimal response based on long-term outcomes rather than immediate feelings. Most people skip this stage entirely, moving from analysis directly to whatever action feels right in the moment. But feelings are terrible strategic advisors. Strategic thinking operates on a completely different framework than emotional thinking. Emotions ask, how do I feel about this? Strategy asks, what outcome do I want? Emotions focus on the immediate situation. Strategy considers long-term consequences. Emotions seek to relieve current discomfort. Strategy seeks to create future advantage. When you learn to think strategically instead of emotionally, you stop being a victim of circumstances and start becoming an architect of outcomes. The foundation of strategic response is outcome orientation. Before you decide how to respond to any situation, you must be crystal clear about what you're trying to achieve, not just in this moment, but in the relationship, the project, your career, your life. Most people react to preserve their ego, avoid discomfort, or express their feelings. Strategic thinkers respond to move closer to their desired outcomes. The outcome hierarchy helps you align your immediate response with your broader goals. At the top level, what are your ultimate life goals? Below that, what are your goals for this specific area of your life? Below that, what are your goals for this particular relationship or situation? Finally, what outcome do you want from this specific interaction? Your response should support goals at every level of the hierarchy, not just provide immediate emotional relief. For example, if a colleague criticizes your work in front of others, your emotional response might be to defend yourself aggressively or withdraw and avoid future collaboration. But if your ultimate goal is career advancement, your relationship goal is to be seen as a team player, and your immediate goal is to improve the project, your strategic response might be to thank them for the feedback and ask for specific suggestions for improvement. The strategic options matrix forces you to consider multiple possible responses before choosing one. Most people see only two options in any challenging situation: the thing their emotions want them to do, or nothing. But strategic thinkers generate multiple options and evaluate each one systematically. For every situation, ask yourself, what are at least 5 different ways I could respond to this? What are the likely consequences of each option? Which option best serves my long-term interests? This process often reveals creative solutions that weren't apparent when you were thinking emotionally. The employee who seems to be undermining you might respond better to private collaboration than public confrontation. The client who's making unreasonable demands might be more flexible if you help them understand the constraints you're working within. The family member who's being difficult might be going through challenges you're not aware of. Risk assessment becomes crucial when moving from analysis to strategy. Every response carries potential benefits and potential costs. Strategic thinkers don't just consider the upside of their actions. They systematically evaluate the downside. What's the worst-case scenario if this response backfires? What relationships might be damaged? What opportunities might be lost? What precedent does this set for future interactions? The reversibility test is a powerful tool for strategic evaluation. Before implementing any response, ask yourself, if the roles were reversed, how would I want the other person to handle this situation? This question often reveals whether your planned response is driven by strategy or ego. If you wouldn't want someone to respond to you the way you're planning to respond to them, you probably need to reconsider your approach. Timing strategy recognizes that the right response at the wrong time can be worse than no response at all. Sometimes the strategic move is to address an issue immediately while emotions are running high. Sometimes it's better to wait until emotions have cooled and rational discussion is possible. Sometimes you need to gather more information before responding. Sometimes you need to prepare the other person for a difficult conversation. The strategic delay technique involves intentionally postponing your response until you can deliver it more effectively. This isn't procrastination or avoidance. It's tactical timing. You might say, I want to give this the consideration it deserves. Can we revisit this tomorrow? Or, let me think about what you've said. and get back to you with a thoughtful response. Influence strategy considers how your response will affect not just the immediate situation, but your ongoing ability to influence this person and others. Every interaction is both a current event and a precedent for future interactions. How you handle this conflict will influence how people approach you with future conflicts. How you respond to this opportunity will influence what opportunities people bring to you in the future. The reputation impact analysis asks, how will this response affect how others see me? Will it increase or decrease my credibility? Will it make people more or less likely to trust me with important responsibilities? Will it enhance or damage my reputation for being reasonable, reliable, and strategic? Your response should strengthen your position for future interactions, not just address the current situation. Strategic thinking also involves considering the systemic effects of your response. How will your actions influence the broader culture or dynamic of your team, organization, or family? If everyone responded the way you're planning to respond, would that create a positive or negative environment? Your individual choices contribute to larger patterns, and strategic thinkers consider their role in shaping those patterns. The three-level strategy framework evaluates every response on immediate, intermediate, and long-term impact. How will this response affect the situation in the next hour? How will it affect things in the next month? How will it affect your relationship and reputation over the next year? The most strategic responses create positive outcomes at all three time horizons. Advanced strategic thinking involves game theory, understanding how your response will influence the other person's future behavior. If you respond aggressively, will that escalate or de-escalate future conflicts? If you accommodate their request, will that encourage reasonable future requests or unreasonable demands? If you set a firm boundary, will that create respect or resentment? Strategic responses shape the rules of engagement for all future interactions. Chapter 7. Execution. Acting on logic. Instead of emotion, even when it feels wrong. Execution is where your logic engine either proves its worth or falls apart completely. You've done the mental work of recognition, pause, analysis, and strategy. You know what the logical response should be. But now comes the moment of truth. Actually implementing that response when every emotional fiber in your body is screaming at you to do something else. This is where most people fail, and it's what separates those who understand strategic thinking from those who can actually execute it under pressure. The gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it is where emotional intelligence becomes emotional discipline. It's one thing to rationally understand that you should stay calm during criticism. It's entirely different to actually remain calm when someone is attacking your competence in front of your colleagues. It's easy to know that you should address conflicts directly rather than avoiding them. It's much harder to have that difficult conversation when your anxiety is telling you to run away. Execution requires what I call emotional courage. The willingness to act on logic, even when your emotions are generating intense pressure to do something else. This isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending they don't exist. This is about acknowledging your feelings while refusing to let them dictate your actions. It's about feeling scared and speaking up anyway. Feeling angry and staying respectful anyway. Feeling hurt and responding constructively anyway. The commitment bridge is the mental tool that carries you from logical understanding to logical action. Before you enter any situation where you're likely to be emotionally triggered, you make a specific commitment to yourself about how you will respond, not how you hope to respond or how you think you should respond, but how you will respond regardless of what emotions arise. For example, before going into a performance review where you expect criticism, you commit to listening actively, asking clarifying questions, and thanking your supervisor for specific feedback, regardless of how defensive you feel. Before having a difficult conversation with your spouse, you commit to using I statements, staying focused on solutions, and avoiding bringing up past grievances, regardless of how frustrated you become. The key is making these commitments when you're in a calm, rational state, not in the heat of the emotional moment. When your emotions are activated, your rational mind becomes less accessible. But if you've already made a clear commitment to specific behaviors You can execute on that commitment even when logical thinking becomes difficult. Physical execution techniques help your body support your logical decisions when your emotions are pushing for different actions. The strategic breath involves taking 3 deep breaths before speaking, not just to calm yourself, but to remind yourself of your commitment and give your rational mind time to guide your response. The posture reset involves adjusting your body language to match the energy you want to project, rather than the energy you're feeling. Verbal execution requires having specific phrases and frameworks ready to use when emotions are high. Master negotiators and diplomats don't improvise their language during tense moments. They have tested phrases that help them execute their strategic responses even when they're feeling triggered. Phrases like, "Help me understand your perspective when you want to attack." "What would you like to see happen here when you want to defend?" Or, "Let me think about the best way to address that," when you want to react immediately. The execution script technique involves preparing specific language for challenging situations. If you know a conversation is likely to become emotional, script out the key points you want to make and the specific words you'll use to make them. This isn't about being artificial or manipulative. It's about ensuring that your logical intentions get expressed clearly, even when your emotions are activated. One of the biggest obstacles to execution is the authenticity trap. The belief that acting according to logic rather than emotion is somehow fake or dishonest. People say things like, "I need to be true to my feelings," or "I have to express how I really feel." But this thinking confuses authenticity with impulsiveness. Your logical response is just as authentic as your emotional response, often more so because it reflects your deeper values and long-term commitments. True authenticity involves acting in alignment with your highest values and best judgment, not your immediate emotional impulses. The person who stays calm during criticism isn't being fake, they're being professional. The person who responds to anger with curiosity isn't being dishonest. They're being strategic. The person who addresses conflict directly despite feeling anxious isn't being inauthentic. They're being courageous. The execution accountability system helps you follow through on your logical commitments even when emotional pressure mounts. This involves identifying specific people who will hold you accountable for executing your strategic responses rather than defaulting to emotional reactions. Share your commitments with trusted advisors and ask them to check in on how you're following through. Recovery execution deals with what happens when you fail to execute your logical response and default to emotional reaction instead. This will happen, especially when you're first building these skills. The key is not to use one failure as evidence that the system doesn't work, but to treat it as valuable feedback about where your execution needs to be strengthened. The after-action review involves analyzing what happened when you failed to execute your logical response. What specific moment did you abandon your strategy and default to emotion? What was the trigger that overwhelmed your rational mind? What would you do differently next time? How can you strengthen your commitment or modify your approach to make successful execution more likely? Progressive execution involves gradually increasing the difficulty of situations where you practice acting on logic instead of emotion. Start with low-stakes situations where the emotional triggers are mild and the consequences of failure are minimal. As you build confidence and skill in executing logical responses, gradually tackle more challenging situations with higher emotional intensity and greater consequences. The execution momentum principle recognizes that successful execution builds on itself. Every time you successfully act on logic instead of emotion, you strengthen your capacity to do it again. You prove to yourself that you can override emotional impulses when necessary. You build confidence in your ability to execute strategic responses under pressure. Each successful execution makes the next one easier and more natural. But execution also requires accepting that it will never feel completely natural. There will always be a part of you that wants to react emotionally rather than respond strategically. The goal isn't to eliminate that tension, but to develop the discipline to act on logic despite the tension. Elite performers in every field deal with this same dynamic. The gap between what feels natural and what produces results. Chapter 8. The Influence Advantage. Using your logic engine to persuade and lead others. Once you've mastered your own emotional reactions, your logic engine becomes a powerful tool for influencing others. While most people are trapped in emotional thinking, you operate from a place of strategic clarity that gives you an enormous advantage in persuasion, negotiation, and leadership. You can see patterns they miss, remain calm when they're reactive, and guide conversations toward outcomes that serve everyone's interests. This isn't about manipulation. It's about leadership through logical thinking. The foundation of influence through logic is understanding that most people make decisions emotionally and then rationalize them logically. They don't want to admit this, even to themselves. So they create logical-sounding justifications for choices that were actually driven by feeling. Your advantage comes from recognizing this pattern and structuring your influence accordingly. You provide both the emotional motivation and the logical justification people need to make decisions. Emotional intelligence in influence means reading other people's emotional states accurately and adjusting your approach accordingly. When someone is anxious, they need reassurance and clear next steps. When someone is excited, they need help channeling that energy productively. When someone is frustrated, they need to feel heard and understood before they can consider new information. Your logic engine helps you recognize these emotional states without being hijacked by them. The logic-emotion bridge is your primary influence tool. You connect with people's emotions to build rapport and trust. Then guide them toward logical conclusions that serve their interests and yours. You might say, I can see this situation is really frustrating for you, and I think there's a way we can address your concerns while also moving this project forward. You acknowledge their emotional reality while introducing logical problem solving. Strategic questioning becomes incredibly powerful when you're not emotionally invested in being right. Most people ask questions to prove their point or defend their position, but when you're operating from your logic engine, you can ask questions to genuinely understand other people's perspectives and uncover information that leads to better outcomes. Questions like, what would need to happen for you to feel confident about this decision? Or, what concerns you most about this approach. The perspective-taking advantage allows you to understand situations from multiple viewpoints simultaneously. While others are locked into their emotional perspective, you can see how things look from their point of view, from your point of view, and from the perspective of other stakeholders. This broader view often reveals solutions that satisfy everyone's core needs. Solutions that aren't visible when you're trapped in emotional thinking. Influence timing becomes much more sophisticated when you're not driven by your own emotional needs. You can recognize when someone is in the right mental state to consider new ideas and when they need more time to process information. You can identify the optimal moment to introduce difficult topics, make requests, or propose changes. You understand that the right message at the wrong time is often worse than no message at all. The resistance Aikido technique involves using other people's emotional energy to guide them toward logical conclusions rather than fighting against their resistance. When someone objects to your proposal, instead of defending it, you ask, "What would you need to see to feel comfortable with this approach?" When someone attacks your position, you respond with, "Help me understand what I'm missing from your perspective." You redirect their energy toward problem solving rather than conflict. Advanced influence through logic involves understanding the difference between positions and interests. Positions are what people say they want. Interests are why they want it. Two people might have completely opposing positions but compatible interests. The employee who demands a raise position might actually be most concerned about feeling valued and having growth opportunities, interests. The client who insists on unrealistic deadlines, position, might actually be worried about looking bad to their own supervisor interests. By focusing on interests rather than positions, you can often find creative solutions that give everyone what they really need. This requires staying emotionally detached from your own position, so you can focus on understanding everyone's underlying interests. Your logic engine allows you to remain curious about other people's motivations, rather than defensive about your own proposals. The strategic concession framework helps you use small compromises to achieve larger goals. When you're not emotionally attached to being right about everything, You can afford to concede minor points in order to build rapport and goodwill for more important issues. You might say, "You're absolutely right about that concern. I hadn't thought of it that way." Given that, what if we tried this approach instead? Influence through logical thinking also means helping other people think more clearly about their own situations. Most people are trapped in emotional reactions that prevent them from seeing their options clearly. By asking the right questions and providing different frameworks for thinking about problems, you can help them discover solutions that serve their interests better than their initial impulses. The cognitive reframing technique involves helping people interpret situations in more useful ways. Instead of telling them their interpretation is wrong, you offer alternative perspectives that might be more accurate or productive. Another way to look at this might be, or what if this situation is actually an opportunity to, or I wonder if they might be responding this way because leadership through logic means modeling strategic thinking for others. When everyone else is getting swept up in drama or crisis, you remain calm and focused on solutions. When others are making decisions based on fear or excitement, you ask questions that help them consider long-term consequences. When conflicts arise, you guide people toward understanding each other's perspectives rather than defending their positions. The teaching through questions approach helps others develop their own logical thinking skills rather than just telling them what to do. Instead of giving advice, you ask questions that help them analyze their situation more thoroughly. What outcome are you hoping for here? What are your main options? What are the likely consequences of each option? What information do you need to make this decision? Influence ethicality becomes crucial when you have the advantage of logical thinking over emotional reactions. Your goal should be to create outcomes that serve everyone's legitimate interests, not just to get what you want. The best influence comes from helping people make decisions that they'll be happy with in the long term, even if those decisions require short-term sacrifice or discomfort. Chapter 9. Emotional Leverage. Turning your biggest triggers into your greatest strategic assets. The ultimate mastery of the logic engine isn't just managing your emotional triggers. It's transforming them into strategic advantages. Every trigger that once hijacked your thinking can become a source of valuable information and motivation. Every situation that used to make you reactive can become an opportunity to demonstrate your strategic thinking skills. This isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending they don't matter. This is about weaponizing your emotional sensitivity for strategic success. Most people see emotional triggers as weaknesses to overcome. But triggers are actually sources of high-quality information about what matters to you, what threatens your goals, and where your attention needs to be focused. When you learn to interpret triggers correctly, they become early warning systems that help you identify opportunities and threats before others even notice them. The trigger-to-signal conversion process begins with understanding what your specific triggers are really telling you. Anger often signals that something you value is being threatened or that an injustice needs to be addressed. Anxiety often signals that you need more information or better preparation before moving forward. Frustration often signals that current approaches aren't working and new strategies are needed. Fear often signals that you're approaching something important that could significantly impact your future. Instead of trying to eliminate these emotional responses, you learn to translate them into strategic intelligence. The person who gets angry when they see inefficiency can become exceptionally good at optimizing systems. The person who gets anxious about uncertainty can become excellent at risk assessment and contingency planning. The person who gets frustrated with poor communication can become a master at creating clarity and alignment. The strategic sensitivity framework helps you identify how your emotional patterns can serve your goals. What situations consistently trigger strong emotions in you? What values or concerns do those triggers reveal? How could that sensitivity become a source of competitive advantage? How could you leverage that emotional intelligence to create better outcomes for yourself and others? For example, if you're consistently triggered by being excluded from important conversations, that sensitivity can help you become exceptionally skilled at building inclusive environments and ensuring all stakeholders are properly engaged. If you're triggered by unclear expectations, you can become a master at creating clarity and setting proper expectations in every situation you influence. Emotional fuel conversion involves using the energy from your triggers to power productive action instead of destructive reactions. Anger can fuel determination and persistence when channeled strategically. Anxiety can fuel thorough preparation and attention to detail. Frustration can fuel innovation and creative problem-solving. Fear can fuel careful analysis and strategic thinking. The key is learning to feel the emotional energy without being controlled by it. You can be angry and strategic simultaneously. You can be anxious and proactive at the same time. You can be frustrated and constructive in the same moment. You can be afraid and courageous together. The emotion provides the energy. The logic engine provides the direction. Trigger prediction becomes a powerful planning tool once you understand your patterns. If you know that certain types of situations consistently trigger specific emotions, you can prepare strategic responses in advance. You can enter challenging situations with clear commitments about how you'll respond when your emotions are activated. You can use your emotional patterns as a guide for where you need to be most prepared. The emotional Aikido technique involves using other people's emotional energy to create better outcomes rather than being triggered by their reactions. When someone gets angry at you, instead of getting defensive, you can use their emotional intensity as information about what they really care about. When someone gets anxious, you can use that as a signal to provide more reassurance and clarity. When someone gets excited, you can use that energy to build momentum toward shared goals. This requires developing immunity to other people's emotional states, while remaining sensitive to the information those states provide. You don't catch their anxiety, but you recognize it and respond strategically to it. You don't get pulled into their anger, but you understand what's driving it and address the underlying concerns. Advanced emotional leverage involves using your triggers as feedback mechanisms for your strategic thinking. If you find yourself getting emotionally activated, that's often a sign that you need to step back and analyze the situation more thoroughly. If you're feeling defensive, that might indicate you're more attached to being right than to finding the best solution. If you're feeling overwhelmed, that might signal you need to break a complex problem into smaller, manageable pieces. The trigger as teacher mindset treats every emotional activation as an opportunity to learn something valuable about yourself, the situation, or other people involved. Instead of judging yourself for having emotional reactions, you become curious about what those reactions are trying to tell you. Instead of fighting against your triggers, you use them as sources of strategic intelligence. Emotional pattern recognition helps you identify systemic issues that need to be addressed. If you're consistently triggered by the same type of situation across different contexts, that's often a sign of a deeper pattern that needs attention. If multiple people are having similar emotional reactions to the same circumstances, that's valuable information about what's not working in that environment. This level of emotional intelligence allows you to become a problem solver rather than just a problem reactor. You can identify issues before they escalate into crises. You can address root causes rather than just symptoms. You can create environments where people's emotional needs are met proactively rather than reactively. The emotional leadership advantage comes from your ability to help others transform their triggers into strategic assets as well. You can help team members understand what their emotional reactions are telling them. You can guide people toward using their emotional energy productively rather than destructively. You can create cultures where emotional intelligence is valued and developed rather than suppressed or ignored. Chapter 10. Building Unshakable Mental Discipline. Making strategic thinking your default response. The final stage of logic engine mastery is making strategic thinking so automatic that you no longer have to consciously choose between emotional reaction and logical response. This isn't about becoming an emotionless robot. This is about developing such strong mental discipline that your default response to any challenging situation is to engage your strategic thinking before your emotional reactions can take control. This level of mental discipline is what separates true masters from people who sometimes remember to think strategically Mental discipline isn't about willpower or forcing yourself to behave differently through sheer determination. Those approaches fail because they require constant conscious effort, and conscious effort gets depleted throughout the day. True mental discipline comes from building automatic habits that engage your logic engine without requiring conscious decision-making. You want strategic thinking to become as automatic as breathing. The systematic desensitization approach involves gradually exposing yourself to increasingly challenging emotional triggers while practicing your logic engine responses. Start with low-intensity situations where you can easily maintain strategic thinking. As you build confidence and skill, progressively tackle more emotionally challenging situations. This builds your capacity to think strategically under increasing levels of emotional pressure. For example, if you're working on staying calm during criticism, start by asking friends to give you minor feedback on low-stakes topics. Practice receiving their input using your logic engine process. Once that feels natural, ask colleagues for feedback on more significant work issues. Eventually, you'll be able to maintain strategic thinking even when receiving harsh criticism about things that matter deeply to you. The daily training protocol involves practicing your logic engine skills every single day, not just when you're facing major challenges. Just like physical fitness, mental discipline requires consistent training to maintain and improve. This means looking for opportunities throughout each day to practice recognition, pause, analysis, strategy, and execution in small situations. Every minor irritation becomes a training opportunity. The slow internet connection, the long line at the store, the colleague who's running late for a meeting. Instead of defaulting to automatic frustration, you practice engaging your logic engine. You recognize the trigger, pause to think, analyze what's really happening, determine the optimal response, and execute strategically. These small victories build the mental habits that serve you in much larger challenges. Environmental design is crucial for building unshakable mental discipline. You can't rely on willpower alone when you're constantly surrounded by triggers and distractions. Instead, You need to systematically design your environment to support strategic thinking and minimize unnecessary emotional stress. This includes everything from your physical workspace to the people you spend time with to the media you consume. Create physical reminders of your commitment to strategic thinking. Some people put a small object on their desk that reminds them to pause before reacting. Others use phone wallpapers with questions like, "What outcome do I want here?" Or, "What would a strategic thinker do?" The goal is to create environmental cues that automatically prompt your logic engine to engage. The stress inoculation training involves deliberately putting yourself in controlled, stressful situations so you can practice maintaining strategic thinking under pressure. This might mean taking on challenging projects that push you out of your comfort zone, having difficult conversations you've been avoiding, or placing yourself in competitive situations where emotions typically run high. The key is that these situations are controlled and purposeful. You're not seeking stress for its own sake, but using it as a training ground for developing unshakable mental discipline. Each time you successfully maintain strategic thinking under stress, you build confidence in your ability to do it when it really matters. Mental discipline also requires developing what I call strategic reflexes, automatic response patterns that engage when you encounter common triggers. Just like a martial artist develops reflexes that activate during conflict, you can develop reflexes that automatically activate your logic engine during emotional challenges. For instance, when someone criticizes you, your strategic reflex might be to automatically ask, "What can I learn from this feedback?" When you feel overwhelmed by a complex problem, your strategic reflex might be to automatically break it down into smaller components. When you feel angry about a situation, your strategic reflex might be to automatically ask, "What outcome do I want here, and what's the best way to achieve it?" The compound effect principle recognizes that small improvements in mental discipline compound over time into dramatic increases in your strategic thinking capabilities. Each time you choose strategic response over emotional reaction, you're not just handling that situation better. You're building mental pathways that make strategic thinking easier in the future. This is why consistency matters more than perfection. It's better to apply your logic engine imperfectly every day than to apply it perfectly once a week. The goal is to make strategic thinking so habitual that it becomes your natural response to challenging situations. Recovery protocols are essential for maintaining mental discipline over the long term. You will occasionally fail to engage your logic engine and default to emotional reactions instead. The key is not to use these failures as evidence that the system doesn't work, but to treat them as valuable learning opportunities that help you refine your approach. The after-failure analysis involves examining what led to the breakdown in your mental discipline. Were you tired, stressed, or dealing with too many challenges simultaneously? Did you encounter a trigger you hadn't prepared for? Did you skip part of your daily training protocol? Understanding the conditions that lead to failure helps you strengthen your systems and prevent similar breakdowns in the future. Advanced mental discipline involves developing what I call meta-strategic awareness, the ability to monitor your own strategic thinking processes and adjust them in real time. You become aware not just of your emotional triggers, but of when your strategic thinking is becoming less effective. You notice when you're starting to rationalize emotional decisions instead of making truly logical choices. This level of self-awareness allows you to catch mental discipline breakdowns before they become complete failures. You recognize when your logic engine is starting to malfunction and take corrective action. You might need more sleep, less stress, better preparation, or simply a reminder to slow down and think more carefully. The ultimate goal of building unshakable mental discipline is to reach a state where strategic thinking becomes effortless. You no longer have to fight against emotional impulses because logical analysis has become your automatic first response. You no longer have to force yourself to pause and think because pausing has become natural. You no longer have to remember to consider long-term consequences because strategic thinking has become your default mental operating system. At this level, you join the ranks of people who seem to naturally handle any challenge with calm confidence. People start asking you how you stay so composed under pressure, how you always know what to say in difficult situations, how you make such consistently good decisions. The answer isn't that you're naturally gifted or emotionally detached. The answer is that you've built unshakable mental discipline that makes strategic thinking your automatic response to any situation. Chapter 11. Real World Logic Engine Applications. Mastering high-stakes situations. The true test of your logic engine isn't how well it works during calm moments of reflection, but how effectively you can deploy it during the most challenging, high-pressure situations of your life. These are the moments when everything is on the line. Crucial negotiations that determine your career trajectory. Relationship conflicts that could end marriages. Investment decisions that could make or break your financial future. Leadership challenges that test everything you believe about yourself. In high-stakes career situations, your logic engine becomes the difference between advancement and stagnation. Consider the moment when your boss publicly disagrees with your proposal in front of senior leadership. Your emotional brain screams at you to defend your position aggressively or retreat in embarrassment. But your logic engine recognizes this as an opportunity to demonstrate strategic thinking under pressure. You pause, acknowledge their concern, ask clarifying questions, and collaborate on finding a solution that addresses everyone's objectives. Instead of damaging your reputation, you enhance it by showing that you can handle criticism professionally and focus on outcomes rather than ego. The negotiation advantage becomes overwhelming when you're operating from strategic logic, while others are trapped in emotional reactions. Most people negotiate from positions of fear, greed, or pride. They get attached to specific outcomes and lose sight of their underlying interests. They take disagreements personally and waste energy on being right instead of finding solutions. But when you're running your logic engine, you can see opportunities they miss. Remain calm when they're reactive, and guide conversations toward mutually beneficial outcomes. In salary negotiations, while others get nervous and accept the first offer or get aggressive and damage relationships, you can systematically analyze what both parties actually need. You research market rates, understand the company's constraints, Identify your unique value proposition and present solutions that serve everyone's interests. You don't just ask for more money. You demonstrate why investing in you creates value that exceeds the cost. Relationship mastery through strategic thinking transforms how you handle the most emotionally charged situations in personal life. When your partner is angry about something that seems trivial to you, your emotional brain wants to dismiss their feelings or defend your actions. But your logic engine recognizes that their reaction contains valuable information about unmet needs or deeper relationship dynamics. Instead of fighting about the surface issue, you use strategic questioning to understand what's really happening and address the underlying concerns. The conflict resolution advantage comes from your ability to stay focused on solutions while others get trapped in blame and defensiveness. You can acknowledge emotions without being controlled by them, separate people from problems, and guide conversations toward outcomes that strengthen relationships rather than damage them. You become someone others turn to when they need help navigating difficult situations because they know you can think clearly when emotions are running high. Investment and financial decision-making becomes dramatically more effective when you're not swayed by fear and greed. While others make emotional decisions based on market panic or excitement about hot trends, you can systematically analyze risk and reward, consider long-term implications, and make decisions based on logic rather than emotion. You don't buy high because you're caught up in excitement, or sell low because you're paralyzed by fear. The entrepreneurial advantage is massive when you can think strategically about business challenges instead of being overwhelmed by the emotional roller coaster of starting and running a company. Every entrepreneur faces moments when everything seems to be falling apart. When customers are unhappy, when cash flow is tight, when competitors are gaining ground. Your logic engine helps you separate real problems from temporary setbacks. Identify the highest leverage actions to take and maintain strategic focus when others are panicking or giving up. Leadership under pressure becomes your defining characteristic when you've mastered strategic thinking. During organizational crises, while others are caught up in drama and finger-pointing, you can assess what's really happening, identify root causes, develop solutions, and guide your team toward productive action. You become the calm in the storm, the person others look to for direction when everything feels chaotic. Public speaking and presentation mastery flows naturally from logic engine development. Instead of being paralyzed by anxiety about how others might judge you, you can focus on delivering value to your audience. Instead of getting defensive when people ask challenging questions, you can use those questions as opportunities to demonstrate your expertise and build credibility. Your strategic thinking helps you adapt your message in real time based on audience reactions and guide conversations toward your desired outcomes. Crisis management becomes one of your core competencies because you can think clearly when others are overwhelmed by stress and uncertainty. Whether it's a family emergency, a work crisis, or a personal setback, you can quickly assess the situation, identify what needs to happen immediately, and create action plans that address both short-term urgency and long-term implications. The social dynamics advantage appears in every group situation. While others get caught up in politics, personality conflicts, and power struggles, you can see the underlying dynamics that drive group behavior. You can identify who the real decision makers are, understand what motivates different stakeholders, and position yourself as someone who brings solutions rather than problems. Advanced logic engine application involves recognizing that different situations require different strategic approaches. High-trust relationships allow for more direct communication and collaborative problem-solving. Low-trust situations require more careful positioning and incremental trust building. High-stakes decisions demand more thorough analysis and risk assessment. Routine decisions can be streamlined without sacrificing strategic thinking. The compound effect of consistently applying your logic engine in high-stakes situations creates exponential improvements in every area of your life. Each successful application builds your reputation as someone who can be trusted with important responsibilities. People start bringing you their most challenging problems because they know you can think clearly under pressure. Opportunities find you because you've demonstrated the judgment and strategic thinking that create value for others. Chapter 12. The unshakable mind. Operating at peak performance under maximum pressure. Peak performance under pressure is where logic engine mastery separates the truly elite from everyone else. Anyone can think strategically when they're comfortable and relaxed. The real test comes when everything is on the line. When failure has serious consequences, when time is short, and when everyone around you is losing their composure. This is where unshakable minds are revealed. And it's where your years of logic engine training pay the greatest dividends. Pressure creates a specific type of mental distortion that destroys most people's ability to think clearly. Time compression makes everything feel urgent. Even decisions that could benefit from more consideration. Stakes amplification makes small mistakes feel like catastrophic failures. Social pressure makes you more concerned about how others perceive your actions than about choosing the optimal strategy. Information overload makes it difficult to distinguish important signals from meaningless noise. The Elite Performance Protocol is designed specifically for these maximum pressure situations. It's a streamlined version of your logic engine that can operate even when your cognitive resources are being taxed to their limits. Under extreme pressure, you don't have time for lengthy analysis or complex strategy development. You need rapid recognition. Instant pause. Essential analysis. Immediate strategy. And decisive execution. Rapid recognition under pressure requires developing what I call threat opportunity radar. The ability to instantly categorize situations based on their true significance rather than their emotional intensity. Not every urgent situation is actually important. Not every important situation requires immediate action. Your trained mind can quickly distinguish between genuine emergencies that require immediate response and manufactured urgency that benefits from strategic thinking. The pressure pause is different from normal pausing because you're working against both external time pressure and internal stress responses. Your body is flooded with adrenaline. Your heart rate is elevated, and every instinct is screaming at you to take immediate action. The pressure pause involves taking one conscious breath, not to relax, but to remind yourself that you have more time than your emotional brain believes you do. Even in genuine emergencies, you almost always have a few seconds to engage your strategic thinking. The surgeon has a moment to assess the situation before making the first cut. The negotiator has a moment to consider their response before speaking. The leader has a moment to think before issuing orders. These moments are where unshakable minds prove their worth. Essential analysis under pressure means cutting through complexity to identify the 2 or 3 factors that will determine success or failure. You don't have time to analyze every variable, but you do have time to identify what really matters. What's the worst-case scenario if this goes wrong? What's the minimum viable success? What's the highest leverage action I can take right now? These questions help you focus on what's essential when everything feels critical. The pressure strategy framework operates on the principle that under pressure, simple strategies executed flawlessly beat complex strategies executed poorly. Your strategic response needs to be clear enough to remember, simple enough to execute under stress, and robust enough to handle unexpected complications. You're not looking for the perfect strategy. You're looking for the strategy most likely to succeed given current constraints. Execution under pressure requires what I call committed action. The ability to implement your strategic choice with full conviction, even when you're not completely certain it's correct. Under pressure, you rarely have perfect information or unlimited time to make decisions. You have to act on incomplete analysis while maintaining the discipline to execute your strategy consistently. The mental fortress technique helps you maintain strategic thinking even when external pressure is designed to break your composure. This might be a hostile negotiation where the other party is trying to intimidate you. A performance review where you're being criticized unfairly, or a crisis where everyone is looking to you for leadership while panicking themselves. Your mental fortress is built on the foundation that your self-worth and strategic thinking ability are not dependent on external validation or immediate outcomes. You can remain calm and focused even when others are trying to make you reactive. You can think clearly even when surrounded by chaos. You can make strategic decisions even when facing criticism or pressure. To conform to others' emotional reactions. Advanced pressure management involves understanding that some of your best strategic thinking happens under appropriate levels of stress. Elite performers across all fields understand that pressure can enhance focus, creativity, and decision-making when you're properly trained to handle it. The goal isn't to eliminate pressure, but to channel it productively. The pressure to performance conversion happens when you reframe pressure situations as opportunities to demonstrate your capabilities rather than threats to your well-being. Instead of thinking, I can't afford to mess this up, you think, this is my chance to show what I can do when it matters. Instead of focusing on potential failure, you focus on potential success and the strategies most likely to achieve it. Sustained performance under pressure requires managing your energy and attention strategically. You can't maintain maximum intensity indefinitely without burning out or making mistakes due to fatigue. Elite performers develop rhythms that allow them to peak when it matters most, while recovering when possible. The recovery in motion technique allows you to restore your mental clarity even while continuing to operate in high-pressure environments. This might involve taking strategic breaks to reassess your approach, delegating responsibilities that don't require your unique capabilities, or temporarily stepping back from reactive decision-making to engage in more systematic planning. Pressure leadership becomes your defining characteristic when you can help others think clearly during challenging situations. While everyone else is getting swept up in crisis mode, you can model strategic thinking, ask the right questions, and guide group decision-making toward productive outcomes. You become the person others rely on when stakes are high, because you can think clearly when clear thinking is most needed. The ultimate pressure test is when multiple high-stakes situations converge simultaneously. Your career is facing major challenges. Your relationship is strained. Your health requires attention. And your financial situation needs careful management. This is where unshakable minds prove their worth by applying strategic thinking across multiple domains without being overwhelmed by the cumulative pressure. Chapter 13. Building Logic Engine Systems. Creating environments that support strategic thinking. Individual mastery of the logic engine is powerful, but systemic mastery creates exponential advantages. When you build systems, cultures, and environments that support strategic thinking, you multiply your impact far beyond what you could achieve through personal discipline alone. This is how you transform not just your own decision-making, but the decision-making of everyone around you. This is how you create lasting change that extends beyond your direct involvement. Environmental design for strategic thinking starts with the recognition that your physical and social environment profoundly influences your mental state and decision-making quality. Chaotic environments promote reactive thinking. Calm, organized environments support reflective analysis. Environments filled with urgent distractions make strategic thinking difficult. Environments that protect focused time make deep thinking possible. The strategic thinking space involves creating physical environments that support your logic engine process. This might be a specific location where you go to analyze important decisions, a setup that minimizes distractions during strategic planning, or visual reminders that prompt you to engage your strategic thinking process before making decisions. But environmental design goes beyond physical space to include information, diet, and social influences. Strategic thinkers carefully curate the information they consume, focusing on sources that provide deep analysis rather than emotional reactions. They limit exposure to media that promotes fear, outrage, or other emotions that interfere with clear thinking. They seek out content that models strategic thinking and provides frameworks for better decision-making. Social environment curation means surrounding yourself with people who support strategic thinking rather than emotional reaction. This doesn't mean avoiding all emotional people, but it does mean being intentional about whose opinions and reactions influence your own thinking process. Strategic thinkers seek out advisors who can provide objective analysis. mentors who model excellent decision-making, and peers who challenge their thinking constructively. The logic engine culture can be created in any organization or group where you have influence. This involves establishing norms, processes, and expectations that support strategic thinking while discouraging emotional reaction and impulsive decision-making. It means creating space for analysis and debate before making important decisions. It means rewarding thoughtful disagreement and punishing groupthink or emotional manipulation. Meeting systems become a primary vehicle for building logic engine culture. Instead of allowing meetings to become emotional venting sessions or power struggles, you can implement structures that support strategic thinking. This might include mandatory preparation time before important discussions, systematic analysis of options before decision-making, or designated roles for people to play devil's advocate and challenge assumptions. Decision-making protocols ensure that important choices are made using logic engine principles rather than whoever speaks loudest or feels most strongly about the issue. This might involve requiring written analysis before major decisions, establishing criteria for evaluating options, or creating processes that separate idea generation from idea evaluation. The team logic engine involves teaching others the same strategic thinking skills you've developed. This multiplies your impact because instead of being the only person thinking strategically, you're creating a team of strategic thinkers who can support each other and tackle more complex challenges together. Training systems for logic engine skills should focus on practical application rather than theoretical knowledge. People learn strategic thinking by practicing it in real situations with feedback and coaching. This might involve analyzing past decisions to identify what could have been done differently, role-playing challenging scenarios, or working through current decisions using logic engine frameworks. Accountability systems ensure that strategic thinking commitments are actually implemented rather than forgotten when emotions run high. This might involve regular check-ins about how people are applying logic engine skills, peer coaching relationships, or systematic tracking of decision-making quality over time. Communication standards that support strategic thinking involve establishing norms about how people discuss problems, propose solutions, and resolve conflicts. This might include requirements to separate facts from opinions, expectations to consider multiple perspectives before advocating for positions, or guidelines for giving and receiving feedback constructively. The logic engine organization creates competitive advantages that compound over time. Organizations that consistently make better decisions outperform those that make emotional or impulsive choices. Teams that can think strategically under pressure handle crises better and identify opportunities earlier. Cultures that support rational analysis attract and retain higher quality people. Scaling logic engine principles requires understanding that different people will need different approaches to developing strategic thinking skills. Some people are naturally analytical and need help with execution under pressure. Others are naturally action-oriented and need help with pausing and analysis. Some are naturally collaborative and need help making independent strategic decisions. Others are naturally independent and need help considering multiple perspectives. The system maintenance challenge involves keeping logic engine systems functioning when faced with pressure, time constraints, and competing priorities. All systems degrade over time without active maintenance. Strategic thinking systems require ongoing attention to ensure they continue supporting good decision-making, rather than becoming bureaucratic obstacles to action. Measurement systems help you track whether your logic engine systems are actually improving decision-making quality. This might involve analyzing the outcomes of major decisions over time, tracking how often people successfully use strategic thinking frameworks, or assessing whether conflicts are being resolved more constructively. The legacy logic engine is built when you create systems and cultures that continue promoting strategic thinking, even when you're not directly involved. This is how individual mastery becomes organizational transformation. This is how your logic engine skills create lasting change that extends far beyond your personal decision-making. Chapter 14. Advanced Troubleshooting. Refining your logic engine for maximum effectiveness. Even after mastering the basic logic engine system, you'll encounter situations where your strategic thinking process doesn't work as effectively as you'd like. Maybe you're still getting triggered by certain types of situations. Maybe your analysis phase is taking too long for time-sensitive decisions. Maybe you're having trouble executing strategic responses when emotions are running particularly high. Advanced logic engine mastery involves diagnosing and solving these performance issues systematically. The most common advanced challenge is what I call strategic overthinking, where your logic engine process becomes so elaborate that it interferes with timely decision-making. You can get caught in analysis paralysis, endlessly evaluating options without ever choosing one. You can become so focused on finding the perfect strategy that you miss opportunities that require quick action. You can spend so much time analyzing your emotional triggers that you become disconnected from your intuitive wisdom. The efficiency optimization process involves streamlining your logic engine for different types of situations. Routine decisions need abbreviated versions of the full process. Crisis situations need rapid deployment techniques. Complex strategic decisions need more thorough analysis. Personal relationship issues might need more emphasis on emotional intelligence. Professional situations might need more emphasis on political considerations. Calibrating your logic engine means adjusting the intensity and duration of each phase based on the importance and complexity of the situation. A decision about what to have for lunch might require only seconds of recognition and strategy. A decision about changing careers might require days of analysis and multiple rounds of strategy development. The key is matching your mental effort to the significance of the decision. The emotional bypass problem occurs when you become so good at analyzing situations logically that you start ignoring valuable emotional information. Emotions provide important data about your values, relationships, and environmental conditions. The goal isn't to eliminate emotional input, but to process it through your logic engine rather than being controlled by it. Recalibrating emotional sensitivity involves learning when to trust your emotional reactions and when to be skeptical of them. Emotions about people's trustworthiness, for example, are often accurate because they're based on subtle behavioral cues you're processing unconsciously. Emotions about investment opportunities, on the other hand, are often unreliable because they're influenced by marketing and social pressure rather than fundamental analysis. The context switching challenge involves adapting your logic engine for very different types of situations. The strategic thinking approach that works well in professional negotiations might not be optimal for intimate family conversations. The analysis process that serves you well in business decisions might be too impersonal for creative projects. Advanced mastery involves developing situation-specific variations of your core logic engine. Relationship-specific calibration recognizes that different people and different types of relationships require different strategic approaches. High-trust relationships allow for more direct communication and collaborative problem-solving. Low-trust relationships require more careful positioning and defensive strategies. New relationships need more emphasis on building rapport and understanding. Established relationships can handle more challenging conversations and honest feedback. The perfectionism trap occurs when you become so committed to strategic thinking that you judge yourself harshly for any emotional reactions or suboptimal decisions. This perfectionism can actually interfere with your logic engine effectiveness because it creates additional emotional pressure around decision-making. The goal is progress, not perfection. Even masters occasionally make emotional decisions, and the key is learning from those experiences without self-judgment. Recovery protocols for logic engine failures involve systematic analysis of what went wrong and how to prevent similar failures in the future. Did you skip a phase of the process? Were you too tired or stressed to think clearly? Did you encounter a trigger you hadn't prepared for? Was the situation more complex than your initial analysis suggested? Understanding failure patterns helps you strengthen your system. The social pressure override addresses situations where your logic engine is working correctly, but social pressure is making it difficult to execute your strategic choices. Maybe your analysis clearly shows that you should decline a request, but everyone expects you to say yes. Maybe your strategic assessment suggests you should address a conflict directly, but the culture discourages confrontation. Advanced logic engine mastery involves developing the courage to act on your strategic analysis, even when it goes against social expectations or immediate pressure. This doesn't mean being inflexible or ignoring social dynamics. It means being able to distinguish between situations where adaptation serves your interests and situations where standing firm on your strategic assessment is more important. Integration challenges arise when you're trying to apply logic engine principles across multiple areas of your life simultaneously. Maybe you're making good strategic decisions at work but still struggling with emotional reactions in your family relationships. Maybe you're excellent at analyzing financial decisions but still getting triggered by social conflicts. The whole life logic engine involves systematically applying strategic thinking principles across all major areas of your life, while recognizing that each area might require different approaches and different calibration. The goal is consistency in your commitment to strategic thinking, not uniformity in your specific techniques. Metalogic engine development involves becoming strategic about your strategic thinking process itself. This means analyzing when your logic engine is working well and when it's struggling, systematically improving your frameworks and techniques, and continuously adapting your approach based on results and changing circumstances. The advanced mastery paradox is that the more skilled you become at strategic thinking, the more you realize how much you still have to learn. Master-level logic engine practitioners understand that every situation is unique, and every decision provides new information about how to think more effectively. They remain humble about their capabilities, while confident in their systematic approach to decision-making. Chapter 15. The Strategic Life. Living as a Logic Engine Master. You now possess something that 99% of people will never have. The ability to think strategically when everyone around you is reacting emotionally. You can remain calm under pressure when others are panicking. You can see opportunities hidden within problems when others only see threats. You can make decisions based on long-term outcomes when others are driven by immediate feelings. This isn't just a skill you've learned. It's a fundamental transformation in how you operate in the world. The strategic life isn't about becoming cold or calculating. It's about becoming more effective at creating the outcomes you truly want, while maintaining your humanity. and helping others achieve their goals as well. It's about operating from a place of clarity and purpose rather than being pushed around by circumstances and emotions. It's about becoming someone who shapes reality rather than just reacts to it. Living as a logic engine master means that strategic thinking becomes as natural as breathing. You don't have to force yourself to pause and think, because pausing has become automatic. You don't have to struggle to separate facts from interpretations, because analytical thinking is now your default mode. You don't have to fight against emotional impulses, because you've learned to channel emotional energy into strategic action. The compound advantage of logic engine mastery becomes more apparent with each passing year. While others make the same emotional mistakes repeatedly, you're learning from every situation and becoming more strategic over time. While others get stuck in patterns of reactive behavior, you're continuously optimizing your decision-making and creating better outcomes. While others are drained by constant emotional turbulence, you're energized by the clarity and effectiveness that come from strategic thinking. Your professional life transforms in ways that seem almost magical to others. You become known as someone who can handle any challenge with composure and insight. People seek out your perspective on difficult problems because they know you can see solutions they've missed. Opportunities find you because you've demonstrated the strategic thinking that creates value for organizations and relationships. Leadership becomes natural when you can think clearly, while others are overwhelmed by complexity or emotion. You don't have to force yourself into leadership positions. People naturally look to you for guidance during challenging situations. Your influence grows, not because you're trying to control others, but because you consistently make decisions that serve everyone's interests. Relationships reach new levels of depth and satisfaction when you can respond strategically to emotional situations. Instead of getting caught in cycles of conflict and misunderstanding, you can address underlying issues and create genuine resolutions. Instead of being triggered by other people's problems, you can provide the kind of stable, thoughtful support that actually helps them work through their challenges. The personal mastery paradox is that the more capable you become of strategic thinking, the more you appreciate the complexity and nuance of every situation. Beginning logic engine practitioners often think in terms of right and wrong answers. Masters understand that most important decisions involve trade-offs between competing values and uncertain outcomes. This sophistication makes you more effective, not less decisive. Advanced masters develop what I call contextual intelligence, the ability to adapt their strategic thinking approach based on subtle differences in situations, relationships, and objectives. They understand that the same logical framework might lead to different optimal strategies depending on cultural context, timing, relationship dynamics, and dozens of other variables. The teaching imperative becomes clear as you master these skills. You realize that your logic engine capabilities are most valuable when they're shared with others. This doesn't mean forcing your approach on everyone, but it does mean being generous with your insights and helping others develop their own strategic thinking skills when they're interested and ready. Mentoring others in logic engine development becomes one of your most satisfying activities, because you can see the transformation these skills create in people's lives. You watch them move from reactive to strategic, from overwhelmed to composed, from stuck to progressing toward their goals. You see them develop confidence in their ability to handle any challenge life presents. The ripple effect of your logic engine mastery extends far beyond your direct influence. The people you teach become more strategic in their own decisions and relationships. The organizations you influence develop cultures that support better decision-making. The problems you solve stay solved instead of recurring, because you address root causes rather than symptoms. Legacy thinking becomes important as you realize that your strategic thinking skills can create positive change that lasts beyond your own lifetime. The systems you build, the people you mentor, and the cultures you influence can continue promoting strategic thinking long after you're no longer directly involved. The ultimate mastery is reached when you realize that the logic engine isn't something you do. Strategic thinking isn't a technique you apply. It's your natural way of operating in the world. You don't have to remember to think logically, because logical thinking has become your automatic response to any situation. At this level, you join the ranks of people throughout history who have shaped the world through strategic thinking rather than emotional reaction. You become someone who creates solutions instead of just responding to problems. You become someone who builds rather than just survives. You become someone who leads by example, showing others what's possible when human intelligence is applied strategically rather than randomly. The journey from emotional slave to logic engine master is one of the most important transformations you can make in your lifetime. It affects every decision you make, every relationship you build, and every challenge you face. It determines whether you live as a victim of circumstances or as an architect of your own destiny. You now have the tools, frameworks, and understanding necessary to make this transformation complete. The logic engine you've learned isn't just a mental model. It's a practical system for creating the life you actually want. Every time you choose strategic response over emotional reaction, you're building the mental habits that will serve you for the rest of your life. The world needs more people who can think strategically under pressure, who can remain calm in chaos, who can find solutions where others see only problems. You now have the capability to be one of those people. The question isn't whether you can master the logic engine. It's whether you will commit to using it consistently until strategic thinking becomes your natural way of being. Your transformation from emotional reactor to strategic thinker isn't just about improving your own life, though it will certainly do that. It's about becoming someone who can contribute to solving the complex challenges facing humanity. It's about joining the ranks of people who make the world better through clear thinking, wise decisions, and strategic action. The logic engine is now yours. Use it wisely, teach it generously, and watch as strategic thinking transforms not just your life, but the lives of everyone whose path intersects with yours.